Welcome to this exploration of one of the most unsettling instances in Ozark Mountain history. Please let me know where you're watching from and what time you're listening to this narration in the comments section before we start. The locations and times of day or night that these recorded accounts reach are of interest to us. The earliest known disappearances in Missouri's Shannon County started in 1903. Although the Ozarks' thick forests and undulating hills had long been secrets, what transpired that fall would cast a shadow over the area that some claim still exists today. Loggers, trappers, and a local doctor were among the people who vanished within a 3-month period, according to the official records. However, what is left out of those documents is even more unsettling than what is included. The discovery of an abandoned cabin close to the Current River, around 15 miles from the tiny community of Eminence, is where our narrative starts. On the 14th of October 1903, a mail courier called Thomas Whitley, who was using a different route because of water, came across the cottage. He discovered the door standing open, a pot of stew still on the cold stove, and no evidence of the occupant, Elias Woodward, a trapper who had been in the area for almost 20 years. According to his sworn testimony submitted to the Shannon County Sheriff's Office, Whitley's discovery was unusual, not only because of the food that had been left behind, but also because of what he called a strong sense of wrongness about the situation. There was nothing broken or overturned. Although there were no indications of conflict, Woodward's hunting rifle was still positioned over the fireplace, something that the villagers observed he would never have willingly abandoned. The diary, which was discovered open on the table, included the most unsettling entry: "They're moving through the hollow again tonight." The sound is different this time. Deputy Marshal Fleming was sent by the county to look into the matter, but after 3 days of searching, Woodward was nowhere to be found. If not for what transpired in the weeks that followed, the case may have been written off as simply another mountain man who had moved on. The sole doctor in Eminence and the neighboring townships, Dr. Samuel Hawthorne, was supposed to return from a home call to a distant farmstead on the 3rd of November 1903, but he did not. 2 days later, his horse came back by himself, with saddlebags still filled with his medical equipment. Although the horse had plenty of time to settle down on the way home, it was characterized as lathering and shaky, even though it seemed unharmed. The deputy reported that Dr. Hawthorne had been called to the Jenkins farm, about 12 miles northwest of town, to treat Mrs. Jenkins, an elderly woman with pneumonia. Mr. Jenkins, who was examined by the deputy, attested that the doctor had come, attended to his wife, and left just before sunset, returning to Eminence. The path from the Jenkins farm to the town was well known. It was a dirt road that primarily followed the ridgeline before dropping into the river valley. It was rare for a traveler to unintentionally turn off course, but somewhere in those 12 miles, Dr. Hawthorne had disappeared. After following the route, a search group spread out to include the nearby hillsides and hollows. No body, medical bag, hat, coat, or other personal belongings that might have belonged to the missing doctor were discovered. Approximately 7 miles outside town, at a place where the road went along a deep ravine known locally as Baker's Hollow, local hunter John Bradshaw, who had joined the search, found the only odd discovery. A pocket watch was discovered by Bradshaw in the center of the road. Dr. Hawthorne's initials were etched on the case, identifying the watch as his. The watch was still in working order, with the hand stopping at 5:17. Locals had a definite opinion of Baker's Hollow. Sounds were believed to travel there in an odd way, with voices occasionally resonating when they shouldn't, or being completely engulfed by the thick undergrowth. Even when there were no other people for miles, several people who were traveling alone reported hearing whispers, if at all possible. Most travelers stayed away from the hollow, especially after dark. Several members of the search party were seasoned woodsmen who frequently hunted far more difficult terrain, so it's interesting that Deputy Fleming stated in his report that the hollow's search was brief because of the rough terrain. November 17th, Caleb and Joseph Thornton, brothers who were loggers for the Missouri Lumber Company, left their camp to mark trees near the Jacks Fork River, but failed to return. Miles away from their designated work location, their axes and saws were later discovered neatly organized at the base of a sycamore tree. Having spent almost 8 years working for the lumber firm, The Thornton brothers were skilled woodsmen. Their dependability and forest knowledge were well known. William Haskell, the foreman, informed the sheriff that he had dispatched them to designate a white oak stand located approximately 2 miles east of the main camp. He believed they had taken refuge in one of the few huts the firm had scattered over their region when they did not return by evening. He didn't arrange a search until the next day, when they hadn't shown up yet. At first, the search group had no trouble following the Thorntons' trail. In accordance with business policy, they had torched trees along the way, and their boot prints were unique. However, the trail shifted about 1.5 miles from camp. The fires went out, and the footsteps started to stray, no longer going in the direction of the white oak stand. Rather, they turned south toward a set of limestone bluffs that overlooked a Jack's Fork tributary. The oddest part, as Haskell told the sheriff, was that the footprints indicated the brothers were no longer traveling together. They were going in different directions and coming back together, as though they were looking for something, or maybe for one another. The tracks indicated they had been running at times. After reaching the tributary's bank, the trail followed the water downstream for almost 3 kilometers before climbing a steep hillside to a clearing where an old sycamore tree dominated the landscape. The search group discovered the brothers' tools at the base of this tree: 2 axes, 2 saws, marking paint, and their lunch pails with their food still in them. The instruments had been placed precisely so that the saws were perpendicular to the axes formed a cross, and the paint cans were placed at each of the square's 4 corners. A sign of struggle would not have upset the searchers as much as this intentional arrangement did. At the clearing, the footsteps came to an end. The search was extended for several miles in all directions, but the Thornton brothers were never located again. On December 5th, Miranda Hollis, who owned the sole general store in the little community of Incorporated, shuttered her business at nightfall, but failed to show up for dinner at her sister's house. The 2 structures were less than 300 yards apart. Miss Hollis was a well-respected member of the community, a widow in her 52nds, and renowned for her timeliness. Every evening at exactly 5 o'clock, Miranda locked the cash box in the little safe behind the counter, closed the store, and traveled the short distance to Abigail's house for their evening meal. According to her sister, Abigail Wheeler, Abigail noticed that the store lights had gone off at the customary hour on December 5. She sent her son Thomas to see how his aunt was doing when Miranda hadn't come by 5:15. The store was locked, and the lamps were out when Thomas arrived. As was the case every night, he could see through the front window that the display counters had been covered with cloths. It all seemed to be in order. He went home, thinking his aunt might have paused to talk to a neighbor. Abigail's worry had escalated to alarm by 6 o'clock, after Miranda had not been seen and every home in the area had been inspected. The sheriff arrived the following morning after being called from Eminence. He looked around the store and found nothing out of the ordinary. The safe contained the day's receipts. It appears that Miranda had really left the building with the intention of walking to her sister's house because her coat and hat were not on the hooks beside the door. The sole oddity that was mentioned but disregarded in the first report was a slight, strange smell in the store that was metallic, almost like a thunderstorm on its way. Deputy Fleming said they searched the area between Abigail's residence and the store, inch by inch. The dirt was soft enough to accommodate footprints, and there had been some light rain the day before. The 3 wooden steps leading down from the store's front door to the crowded Earth Street were clearly marked by Miranda's characteristic button boots. For perhaps 50 yards, the tracks continued as usual before coming to a sudden halt in the center of the road. No evidence that she had fallen or been carried away was found, nor were there any indications of struggle or other footprints entering or departing the area. Between each stride, it seemed as though Miranda Hollis had just vanished. There was a general disquiet among the people of Shannon County by Christmas 1903. There were no bodies discovered. In a thinly populated area where everyone knew each other's business, 4 individuals had just disappeared without any indication of violence. With the limited resources of a rural sheriff's office at the turn of the century, the official investigation yielded little more than rumors and conjecture. The strange hush that followed these disappearances is what made them so noteworthy. The disappearances were never discussed again in the Shannon County Gazette, which was published on the 16th of January 1904. and stated that an unspoken agreement seems to have fallen over the good people of our county to avoid discussion of the recent unfortunate incidents. The newspaper was not the only source of this quiet. The missing people are not mentioned in the church records from that time period, which are often extensive in their accounting of communal occurrences such as funerals, sicknesses, and calamities. Although there is no record of where or with whom they went, school records indicate that some of the disappeared's children, Dr. Hawthorne had 2 sons, and Caleb Thornton had a daughter, were withdrawn and likely relocated. The lack of an ongoing government probe was the most telling. The cases were never officially concluded, according to the Shannon County Sheriff's records, but nothing more was done after January 1904. There were no wanted posters distributed for the missing. There were no incentives for providing information. A street. Louis Post-Dispatch reporter who had heard about the disappearances reportedly questioned Sheriff William Cunningham, saying, "There's nothing to investigate. Sometimes people just move on without telling anyone. That's their right in a free country." 53 years would pass before anyone would be interested in what transpired in those fall months of 1903. Professor Walter Kincaid of Missouri State University started what he thought would be a simple historical analysis of Ozark folklore in 1956. Instead, he discovered a pattern of similar episodes that began decades before the disappearances in 1903 and continued until at least 1932, but less frequently. The University Library in Springfield has Kincaid's study notes, which show how obsessed he became with the case. The silence surrounding these events is not merely unusual. It appears deliberate and coordinated, he wrote back in 1957. County records show gaps precisely where information about these incidents should be. Church registries omit deaths. Family Bibles have pages removed. Through meticulous cross-referencing of numerous historical documents, Kincaid discovered at least 17 cases, from 1,885 to 1,932, that shared characteristics with the disappearances of 1,903. People going missing from Shannon County's rural areas, little official investigation, and an odd lack of community reaction or continued concern. 4 to 6 people were involved in each of the 3 apparent time periods in which the episodes occurred: 1,885, 1,887, 1,903, 1,904, and 1,931, 1,932. As Kincaid started mapping the locations, he saw that although the disappearances happened all across the county, they were concentrated around the Current and Jacks Fork Rivers watersheds. Especially in places with deep hollows or cave systems, he was more and more certain that the disappearances were related to some geological or topographical characteristic of these regions. When Kincaid found Elias Woodward's journal, not just the one page that was left open on the table, but the entire volume that had somehow been withdrawn from the official evidence and was in the ownership of a retired deputy's widow, it was the most unsettling discovery. The entries made before to Woodward's disappearance detailed growing fear of nighttime noises in the forest, especially in the vicinity of what locals referred to as the Dead Hollow, a small gully about 3 miles from his cabin. The 9th of October. Heard it again last night. Not like an animal, more like something heavy being dragged over stones, but rhythmic. Always stops at the edge of the clearing. Jenkins from over Ellington Way used to talk about something similar before he took off last year. Wonder now if he really did take off, like everyone said. 11th of October. Found strange marks on the trees down by the spring today. Not like any blaze I've seen before. Almost like writing, but no letters I recognize. Similar marks on the rocks, too. Recent. The soil underneath was still damp when I brushed it aside. 12th of October. Spent the day tracking whatever's been moving around my clearing at night. Found a trail leading toward the Dead Hollow. Not like any animal track I know. Wide, like something being dragged, but even purposeful. Followed it about a mile before the feeling came over me that I shouldn't go any further. Can't explain it. Like suddenly knowing you're being watched. Headed back to the cabin and found my door standing open, though I know I latched it. Nothing missing, nothing disturbed, but something had been there. The air inside was cold, colder than outside, and had that same metallic smell I noticed by the spring. 13th of October. They're moving through the hollow again tonight. The sound is different this time. Closer. I barred the door, but I don't think it would stop them if they decided to come in. The lantern keeps going dim, though there's plenty of oil. Something's watching from the edge of the trees. I can feel it. Then nothing. It was the last entry, just as Thomas Whitley had told of discovering it. Previous references to the dead hollow in the diary described it as a location that locals shunned. According to Woodward's records, the remarkable lack of wildlife in and around it had given it its name more than any documented deaths. No bird's nest there? He noted in a June 1902 entry. No deer browse its edges. Even the insects seem fewer. The old-timers say it's always been that way, long as anyone can remember. In order to broaden his research, Kincaid spoke with senior citizens who had been kids or young adults in 1903. The majority declined to directly discuss the disappearances. When they did talk, they frequently asked that their names not be used. An unnamed source, a woman of about 82, told Kincaid, "Those who talk about what happens in the hollows end up being talked about themselves, and then they aren't talked about ever again." Another elderly resident, a man who had worked for the Missouri Lumber Company at the same time as the Thornton brothers, spoke more bluntly, but he still wouldn't let Kincaid write his name. "There are places in these hills that don't belong to us," he stated. "Never did. The Indians knew it. They left markers, warnings. White folks tore them down, plowed them under, thought they knew better, but the hills remember what belongs to them." When Kincaid inquired about what he meant by belong to them, the man remained quiet for a few minutes before speaking. "Not everything that walks these woods walks on the same ground we do. Sometimes the worlds get thin between each other. Sometimes things cross over that shouldn't. And sometimes people cross over too, willing or not." According to the professor's notes, his displeasure with the wall of silence he faced grew, but he continued to go through the counties of Shannon, Carter, and Oregon, gathering bits of folklore, tales, and anecdotes that he thought might be related to the events of 1903. He started charting the sites of all reported disappearances, homestead abandonments, and what he called perception anomalies, situations in which several witnesses reported strange sensory experiences in one place. The watersheds of the Current and Jacks Fork rivers became the focal point of a pattern that developed. The greatest number of accidents happened far from populated areas, close to deep hollows and cave systems. Kincaid developed a special interest in a region about 20 miles southwest of Eminence, where a number of creeks met, forming a terrain of remote valleys and steep gorges that were only reachable on foot. Kincaid obtained a leave of absence from the university to carry out fieldwork in this field in the spring of 1958. In order to spend 6 weeks recording the landscape and gathering oral histories from the few remote homesteads in the area, he set up a base camp close to what local maps designated as Blowing Cave. His usual correspondence with his department chair suddenly stopped 2 weeks into his mission. His camp was intact but deserted when university officials eventually dispatched a search crew in late May. He had lost his field notes, camera, and journal. A tiny leather purse with soil samples from several sites that were meticulously documented with coordinates was the sole odd object found. These samples were analyzed in the university lab, and the results showed nothing out of the ordinary for the area's forest soil. When there was no sign of Professor Kincaid, the search was finally called off. Officially, his absence was ascribed to mishap in challenging terrain, potentially a fall from one of the region's numerous bluffs. If it weren't for an odd finding discovered in 1963, while building the Ozark National Scenic Riverways Park, the real story of Walter Kincaid's fate could still be hidden in university records. What looked like the remnants of an old root cellar or storage hole were discovered by workers preparing property for a ranger station close to Round Spring. They discovered multiple rolls of exposed but undeveloped film and a water-damaged but still readable journal inside a metal ammunition box that was shielded from the weather. It was Walter Kincaid's journal, The entries, which began with his last mission, lasted for almost 2 weeks following his purported disappearance. By the time the documents were sent to the university by the National Park Service, interest in Kincaid's work had diminished. Along with his other materials, the journal was cataloged and stored away. Apparently, the film's degraded state prevented it from ever being produced. Eleanor Marsh, a doctoral student working on a thesis on Ozark cultural geography, didn't come across Kincaid's recovered journal until 1967. Her readings inspired her to compile all of Kincaid's disparate studies into the first thorough analysis of what she called the Shannon County Anomalies. Kincaid's last journal entries provide a startling account of his final days in the field. His writing style steadily changed from being objective and clinical to becoming more paranoid and erratic. He explained how he discovered a number of caverns that were not marked on any geological survey and had peculiar acoustics that caused noises from deep within to seem to come from behind the listener. The 10th of May. Unusual rock formations. Approximately 2.3 miles northeast of camp. Not natural. Arranged in concentric circles. Largest stones on the outside, smallest in center. No tool marks visible, but precision of placement suggests deliberate construction. No mention of such structures in any survey or local account. Took photographs and soil samples from center of formation. The 11th of May. Returned to stone formation at dawn. Different alignment of shadows reveals additional structures not visible yesterday. Smaller concentric circles radiating from main formation along lines precisely aligned with cardinal directions. Possible astronomical purpose. Took additional photographs from elevated position in nearby tree to capture complete layout. Noticed unusual sound qualities within the central circle. My footsteps produced no echo, despite stone surfaces, but voice seemed to reverberate from below rather than around. Soil at center feels different, more dense, almost vibratory when pressed firmly. On May 12th, visited the McClintock homestead today, abandoned now for almost 30 years. According to local accounts, strange that a property with good water and relatively flat, tillable land would remain unoccupied so long. The McClintocks left sometime in the winter of 1932-33. No record of where they relocated. Structure still surprisingly sound. Found children's toys, kitchen implements, clothing, as if they departed in great haste. Most unusual, all mirrors in the house had been broken, and the pieces buried in a small pit behind the barn. The 13th of May. Found an old man living about 3 miles from the McClintock place. Refuses to give his name, but claims to have known the family. Says they began to see things in the mirrors that shouldn't have been there in the weeks before they left. Claims the youngest child started speaking to his reflection as if it was someone else. When I asked where the family went, he became agitated, saying only, "They didn't go nowhere. They're still here, just not here like we are." He refused to elaborate and asked me to leave. On May 14th, the sounds begin approximately 1 hour after sunset each night. Not animal, not human. Directionally inconsistent. Seems to come simultaneously from multiple locations. During daylight hours, repeated instances of what appears to be movement at the periphery of vision, but nothing visible when looking directly. Temperature drops in certain locations without apparent cause. Left markers at these spots for further investigation. On May 15th, followed the cold spots like a trail leading southwest from camp. They form a straight line despite uneven terrain, cutting across ridges and hollows without deviation. The line leads to a limestone bluff overlooking a small, unnamed tributary of the current. At the base of the bluff, hidden behind dense undergrowth, found what appears to be an entrance. Not a natural cave mouth, but a constructed passage. The stone lintel above the opening bears symbols similar to those Woodward described. Didn't have adequate light to explore further. Will return tomorrow, better equipped. The 16th of May. Found the entrance today. Not natural. Stone lintel. And worked passage extending approximately 60 feet before opening into larger chamber. Walls lined with symbols similar to those described in Woodward's journal. Air quality poor. Strange odor. Metallic taste. Limited exploration due to inadequate light sources. Will return tomorrow with additional equipment. On May 17th, They know I'm here now. Found all my markers rearranged this morning. Someone or something entered my tent while I slept. Nothing taken, but journal moved from field desk to bedside. The McClintock place is watching me when I watch it. Cannot explain.
Will relocate camp closer to cave entrance for efficiency of exploration.
The 18th of May. Spent the day photographing symbols in the entrance passage. They change slightly as one moves deeper. Subtle variations in what initially appeared to be repetitive patterns. Brought samples of the unusual soil from the stone circle and scattered it at the cave entrance. Immediate reaction. Soil appeared to be absorbed into the stone floor much faster than natural percolation would allow. Temperature inside the cave dropped noticeably for several minutes afterward. 19th of May. The descent is significant. Mapped 3 levels so far. The symbols change on each level, becoming more complex, more precise. Evidence of tool use in the lower chambers, but not any methodology I recognize. Found remains of fires, ancient, but preserved in the dry air. Carbon dating would be instructive. The acoustics change in the lower chamber. Sounds from above distorted, elongated. My own voice echoes back, changed. On May 20th, discovered what appears to be a ceremonial space on the 4th level down. Circular chamber approximately 30 feet in diameter. Floor recessed in center, forming shallow bowl. Walls covered entirely in symbols, but different from those in upper passages. More pictographic. They seem to tell a story, though I cannot interpret it yet. Ceiling painted with what might be a star map, but the constellations depicted do not match our night sky. The air here is different, thicker, charged somehow. My equipment malfunctions. Compass spins. Watch runs backwards. Time feels wrong. 21st of May. They're coming up from below now. I hear them at night, moving through the passages. The symbols respond to their presence. Not phosphorescent exactly, but visible in complete darkness. I've sealed the tent as best I can, but the smell permeates everything now. Metallic, antiseptic, wrong. On May 22nd, cannot return to the surface. The way back shifts. Passages that led down now lead sideways. Maps, useless. Compass spins. I left markers, but they've been moved. Someone is leaving food at the periphery of my camp. Not animals. Prepared food. They want me to stay. They want me to go deeper. The symbols make more sense now. Not a language exactly. More like music transcribed. They need to be spoken aloud to be understood. The walls are listening. They always were. Shannon County doesn't have secrets. It is the secret. The journal ends abruptly in the middle of its entry on May 23rd with the following scrolled note. I now understand why some stories shouldn't be told. Why some doors shouldn't be opened. If you're reading this, burn it. Fill the entrance. Forget this place. Eleanor Marsh grew convinced that Kincaid had made an important discovery, possibly a geological anomaly that produced odd perceptual effects or proof of a pre-Columbian culture that archaeology was unaware of. Using the locations from his notes and the labels on the soil samples, she tried to follow his path throughout the summer of 1967. Marsh, in contrast to Kincaid, was cautious and radioed a colleague every day. She reported discovering what might be the stone circle configuration Kincaid had described on the 14th of August 1967 during her last week of fieldwork. At 7:43 p.m., she made her final broadcast after static momentarily interrupted her, and she continued by reporting the area's peculiar acoustic characteristics. Normal sounds becoming muffled, while distant sounds seemed unusually clear. That night, something's happening to the equipment. Batteries draining. Can you hear that? That sound? It's exactly as Kincaid described. Coming from everywhere at once. I'm returning to base camp. We'll contact again in the morning. If anyone comes looking, tell them to bring extra batteries and wait. There's someone at the edge of the clearing. Hello? Hello? Can you help me? My equipment is... Wait. How did you... The symbols you're wearing, the Taos. Marsh's voice can be heard faintly over the recording, which is primarily static. The transmission concludes with a burst of static. 2 days later, Marsh's camp was discovered by a search party. It was intact, but deserted, just like Kincaid's. The search was more thorough than that for Kincaid, involving university staff, park rangers, and local law enforcement. She opened her field journal on her camp table, the last entry detailing how she had found the stone formation and noting unusual equipment malfunctions in its vicinity. Eleanor Marsh was never located, despite searches that lasted for over 2 weeks. Concerned about promoting risky solo treks and challenging terrain, the university later designated all materials pertaining to Kincaid and Marsh's research as restricted. In a memo from the Dean of Research dated October 3, 1967, the official stance was that both researchers probably met with unfortunate accidents in a wilderness area known for dangerous sinkholes, unstable cave systems, and confusing topography. It's interesting to note that the memo discouraged additional research in the particular area where both had vanished, stating that scholarly attention might be more productively directed toward other aspects of Ozark history and geography. The university turned down a number of follow-up requests from other organizations to access them. The materials, including a formal request from the Smithsonian in 1972, the Shannon County disappearances of 1,903, and the subsequent disappearances of the investigators, were buried in local memory and records for almost 40 years. Although the establishment of the Ozark National Scenic Riverways Park brought more tourists to the area, the majority of them stayed on or close to the rivers, not knowing what might be found in the farther-flung ridges and hollows. As earlier park records were digitized in the 1,990 seconds, an odd trend became apparent. Due to delicate ecological zones or hazardous terrain, a number of sites within the park boundaries were declared off-limits to routine ranger patrols. When these restricted areas were plotted, they created a rough circle that was about 20 miles across and centered on the spot where Kincaid and Marsh had vanished. When a journalist asked the park administration about these limitations in 1997, they said they were based on conventional safety procedures and declined to comment further. Journalist Michael Forrester started working on a book about the Ozarks' unsolved mysteries in 2003, precisely 100 years after the initial disappearances. He was able to access the previously restricted materials about the Kincaid and Marsh expeditions from Missouri State University by requesting them under the Freedom of Information Act. In an appendix to his book Whispers in the Hollows, Unsolved Mysteries of the Ozarks, Forrester's notes reveal his surprise at the university's persistent resistance to releasing the documents, even after decades had passed. The archival staff seemed unusually concerned about these particular documents, he stated. One senior archivist warned me off the record that I might not want to look too closely at this particular rabbit hole. When pressed, she would only say that I wasn't the first person to request these materials, and that those who dig into Shannon County tend not to write about it afterward. The most important finding Forrester found was in an unmarked envelope that was kept with Marsh's personal belongings, rather than in the official records. Apparently, from one of the rolls of film that were discovered with Kincaid's recovered notebook, it included a number of processed images. They revealed the stone formation he had described, as well as the entrance to what looked to be a man-made, or at least man-modified, cave, despite the photograph's poor clarity and decay. 3 photos shot inside the cave system were much more unsettling. They displayed chamber walls covered with complex symbols that were unlike any known Native American pictographs or petroglyphs, despite the limits of flash photography in the 1,950 seconds in such an atmosphere. At a considerable distance down a tunnel, the final image, severely overexposed but still recognizable, showed what looked to be a human figure. Despite its strange proportions and placement, the person appeared to be either climbing along the wall rather than strolling, or was captured in mid-fall. Forrester shared copies of the photos and conferred with a number of archaeologists and anthropologists. The emblems did not fit into any recognized cultural tradition. The overall pattern and organization was completely new and unusually complex, suggesting either an unknown indigenous culture or, more concerningly, a sophisticated hoax, according to Dr. Rebecca Lehman of the University of Chicago. Some of the elements were similar to designs from the Mississippian or earlier woodland periods. With the help of local geologists and national park rangers, Forrester made an effort to find the locations depicted in the photos. None were able to pinpoint the precise sites. Although the coordinates in Kincaid's notes clearly place several of the geographical features inside the present boundaries of Shannon County, some indicated that they did not match any recognized formations within that area. Forrester made the decision to go on his own field trip after months of investigation, which included speaking with local elders who recalled the myths surrounding the disappearances in 1903. In contrast to his predecessors, he put together a team consisting of 4 individuals: a geologist who specialized in cave systems, a photographer who had experience recording ancient sites, a professional guide who was acquainted with the Ozarks, and himself. Early in October 2003, they set out on a 2-week journey into the backcountry to find the locations mentioned in Kincaid and Marsh's notebooks. Every evening they checked in with Forrester's publisher via their satellite phone. These communications, which reported challenging terrain but no unexpected discoveries, were typical during the first week. Forrester stated that they had discovered what appeared to be the Stone Formation on October 17, the 7th day. Kincaid and he both described the stones as concentric circles, with the smallest in the center and the largest on the perimeter. With trees now standing inside the circles that would have been saplings or had not yet sprouted in 1903, the creation was largely hidden by a century of forest growth. According to the team's geologist, Dr. Lin Wei Meir of the University of Missouri, the stone had obviously been moved to the site and placed there with purpose, as it displayed no signs of glacial deposits. The stones were positioned there about 900 years ago, long before European settlers arrived, but they were more recent than the majority of the known Native American constructions in the area, according to carbon dating of soil samples retrieved from beneath several of the stones. On this conversation, Forrester reported that his photographer, Sarah Mitchell, had encountered identical equipment failures to those Kincaid and Marsh had reported. Even with fully charged batteries, her digital cameras would abruptly shut off, and when they did, many of the pictures turned out to be distorted or entirely dark. As a backup, she had turned to mechanical film cameras. After several hours of delay, the check-in on October 18th finally occurred at almost midnight. Forrester sounded excited as he reported that they had found what looked to be the entrance to the cave that Kincaid had described. The next day, the team would start recording and investigating the system, which he characterized as architecturally sophisticated, with a stone lintel supporting a passage that showed evidence of tool work. On October 19, check-in was not available. Local authorities were notified by Forrester's publisher after attempts to contact the crew via satellite phone were unsuccessful. Beginning with the coordinates from the last check-in, a search and rescue operation was launched on the morning of October 20th. On the afternoon of October 21st, the search team found the camp of the expedition. It was intact, but abandoned, just like Kincaid and Marsh had been decades before. There were still 4 tents up, each with sleeping bags and personal items. The campfire had been properly put out. Photographic equipment, maps, and open notebooks were spread out on a table. In Forrester's tent, the satellite phone was discovered, fully charged but not in use. The area of the campsite that was most distant from the fire ring was the only indication of disturbance. The search team's tracker reported that although the ground there revealed evidence of several sets of footprints leading off into the forest, the prints' peculiar pattern was that they depicted 4 individuals walking in a staggered line, keeping precisely the same distance from one another and never breaking formation, not even when negotiating challenging terrain or around trees. The footsteps led nearly a mile through dense forest before abruptly ending at the edge of a tiny clearing, which the tracker characterized as more like a military drill than a group of civilians moving through the woods. One stone, about 3 feet high, and resembling others in the concentric circle pattern, stood alone in the middle of the clearing. There were no stone circles, no cave entrance, and no other indications of Forrester or his friends. A park ranger on the search team, who wished to remain anonymous in subsequent accounts, reported discovering a tiny digital voice recorder near the foot of the monument. The ranger reported handing the device over to the sheriff's department, but it was not included in any official inventory of items recovered from the scene. He said that when he activated it, he heard only static for a few minutes, followed by a single sentence in what he thought was Forrester's voice saying, "We understand now. We're going deeper. Don't follow." After 12 days, the search was shortened and ultimately called off as winter weather drew near. Michael Forrester, Lynn Wee Meir, Thomas Burns, the guide and photographer, Sarah Mitchell, had disappeared in the isolated woodlands of Shannon County, just like the others who had gone before them. In 2005, Forrester's research materials were published posthumously as Whispers in the Hollows, but with a noteworthy editorial note stating that some parts had been excluded at the request of Missouri State University and the Shannon County Sheriff's Department. The historical details of the numerous disappearances are presented in the book, but no judgments on their cause are drawn. Speaking anonymously to a paranormal research website in 2008, a former editor at the publishing house asserted that almost one-third of the original text was deleted before it was published. This included transcripts of interviews with Shannon County residents who described the others, or the quiet people who lived in specific hollows, detailed descriptions of the symbols Kincaid had photographed, and exact coordinates for several locations Forrester had designated as thin spots or transition zones. Few people are aware that the book's published edition is very different from Forrester's first draft. After two people who claimed to be from the Department of the Interior visited, the editor decided to redact this material because they were worried that the book might encourage trespassing in hazardous and environmentally sensitive areas of the Ozark National Scenic Riverways. According to the editor, these visitors were unusually insistent and appeared more interested in the precise details being published about the symbols and locations than in possible trespassing. Forrester's conjectures regarding the nature of what might be occurring in Shannon County are included in one of the deleted passages, which was purportedly leaked online in 2012, although its veracity has never been confirmed. He compares the disappearances in the Ozarks to comparable occurrences that have been documented in other wilderness regions across the world, locations where individuals mysteriously disappear, where odd noises are audible, and where perception and time appear to operate differently. The alleged passage asks, what if certain landscapes aren't merely physical? The native populations that inhabited these areas before to European colonization were aware of this. What if they're intersections? Points where our reality overlaps with something else. Their folklore is replete with cautions about particular locations, where the lines separating other worlds become blurry or vanish completely, such as caverns, hollows, particular mountains, or valleys. Though the trend of disappearances indicates otherwise, modern rationality has rejected these as superstitions. The fact that the entire century-long mystery has gotten so little attention outside of the local impacted area may be its most unsettling feature. Despite the unique circumstances and linked to past instances, the disappearances in 2003 received barely cursory coverage in the national media. Since the Forrester voyage, no significant university or research organization has sponsored additional study, indicating equally low levels of academic interest. Local perceptions of the incidents are still cautious. The Missouri Historical Society tried to gather stories of the disappearances from lifelong inhabitants of Shannon County for an oral history project in 2006. In her final report, the project director observed that participants exhibited unusual reticence when the conversation shifted to particular sites connected to the occurrences. Participants ended a number of interviews when the questions were too specific. According to an older participant, some parts of the county don't belong to us, never did, and those who go looking for them don't come back. Much of the region connected to the disappearances came under the purview of the National Park Service in 1964, when the Ozark National Scenic Riverways were designated as a protected federal park. In 2007, the Park Service admitted that some isolated parts of the park were designated as restricted on internal maps, with rangers being told not to perform solo patrols there. In response to Freedom of Information Act requests from multiple journalists who were following up on Forrester's work. In an interview with the local newspaper in 2008, retired park ranger Howard Jenkins, who worked in the Ozark National Scenic Riverways from 1969 to 1992, offered a more frank assessment, citing unstable karst topography presenting sinkhole hazards. There are places in the backcountry where the radio doesn't work. he stated. Places where your GPS will tell you you're miles from where you know you are. Places where compasses spin and watches run fast or slow. We were told to stay on established trails and to always work in pairs in certain areas. No one ever explained exactly why, but those of us who'd been there a while understood. You'd feel it when you got close to one of those places. A kind of pressure in your head, a feeling of being watched. Smart rangers turned around when they felt that. In 1978, Jenkins continued, 2 hikers were reported missing in a secluded region close to Blowing Cave. The hikers were never located, and Jenkins stated that the incident was officially recorded as a probable case of abandonment. We found their campsite 3 days later. Everything was there: tent, sleeping bags, food, water, even their wallets and car keys. But no people, no signs of animal attack or struggle. I'll tell you something I've never told anyone else. We all heard voices that night, coming from different directions. Sometimes they sounded like they were right behind us. Sometimes they were calling from miles away. The voices sounded like the missing hikers, calling for help. But every time we'd head toward one, it would stop, and another would start from a completely different direction. According to him, that's how it always went. There was always some rational explanation put on paper, but those of us who were out there knew different. One of the most persistent and little-known mysteries in American history is what truly transpired in the hollows and forests of Shannon County in 1903, and what still happens to those who go too far into the investigation. There is a pattern to the disappearances, not only in how they are carried out, but also in how people react to and recall them. They take place in isolated areas, leaving no trace of conflict or violence, and are followed by a general quiet that appears to transcend the local populace and include institutional and media reactions. A link to the region's distinctive geology has been proposed by some. Some of the largest and most intricate cave systems in the U.S. can be found in the Ozarks. Sinkholes, underground streams, and natural tunnels formed by water dissolving the limestone bedrock over millions of years are abundant throughout the area. Perhaps, the theory goes, some of these caves connect to particularly deep or extensive systems where individuals might become lost or trapped. However, this does not account for the consistent lack of bodies, the odd arrangement of abandoned possessions, the lack of distress calls or signs of survival attempts, or most importantly, the apparent institutional reluctance to conduct a thorough investigation or make the incidents public. Some argue that the disappearances may be the result of human agency, possibly a cult or secretive community that has sprung up in the isolated hollows and periodically kidnaps outsiders for unidentified reasons. They cite the area's long history of isolation and independence. Historical documents demonstrating that the Ozarks have frequently provided sanctuary to individuals attempting to evade social scrutiny, from Civil War deserters to moonshiners during the Prohibition era to contemporary isolationists give some validity to this theory. However, once more, the pattern appears to be too regular over an extended period of time and involves too many distinct locations over an excessively wide area to be the product of a single human group. Furthermore, it doesn't explain how skilled researchers with cutting-edge technology could disappear without a trace, or how people might be forcibly removed from their houses, from busy roads, or from the heart of logging camps. The most disturbing explanation, and the one that most closely fits the disjointed narratives in regional folklore, is also the most challenging to reconcile with contemporary knowledge, that there is something essentially strange about specific places in Shannon County. Something that sometimes causes people to go, voluntarily or involuntarily, from our world to another by altering perception, physical laws, or the very fabric of reality. Even though this may seem absurd to modern ears, it's important to remember that indigenous societies all over the world have remarkably similar ideas about thin places or portals where, in certain situations, the threshold between realms might be crossed. Oral legends from the Osage and other tribes who formerly called the Ozark region home warn of particular places where those who are not cautious could be abducted by what they have variably referred to as shadow people or the quiet ones. Today's visitors to Shannon County will be greeted by an exceptionally beautiful landscape. The Current and Jacks Fork rivers meander past tall cliffs and over gravel bars as they pass through wooded slopes. In summer, kayakers and canoeists traverse the waters. Trails that connect approved campgrounds and traverse ridgelines are explored by hikers. In the more isolated hollows between the rivers, where mobile phone coverage wanes and the forest becomes especially dense and quiet, few people venture. Locals are pleased to point visitors to the area's antique grist mills, picturesque vistas, and top fishing locations. However, the talk soon shifts to other topics when you ask them about the stone circles or specific caves. Some will merely claim that those locations are non-existent. While acknowledging the stories, some may reject them as outdated myths that are not worth retelling. Specific could gently but firmly caution that it's best to avoid exploring specific areas of the Ozarks. When a film crew from a television program that focuses on paranormal investigations tried to film an episode about the Shannon County disappearances in 2012, it was a particularly telling event. An unusual level of non-cooperation from local officials and locals was faced by the crew, according to a production assistant who later shared the story online. Last-minute cancellations were made by interview subjects who had already consented to participate. Filming permits in specific parts of the national park were refused without providing a reason. Unusual frequency of equipment failures was observed. When the crew's cars were vandalized while parked outside a nearby restaurant, it was the last straw. A pattern of concentric circles with a single line between them was etched into the hood of each automobile, a symbol that was strikingly similar to descriptions of the patterns in Kincaid's images, but without the usual smashed windows or slashed tires. Nobody took ownership. The sheriff's inquiry ended without finding any suspects, and no witnesses came forward. The following day, the crew departed. The episode was never made. About 3 miles from the official Blowing Cave track in the national park, a party of hikers in 2018 came into a small metal container while investigating an unmarked track. Annotated in what specialists later determined to be Eleanor Marsh's handwriting, the tightly rolled paper inside turned out to be a hand-drawn map of what looked to be a cave system. A number of passageways and chambers, not included in any official geological study of the region, were depicted on the map. The map's most odd date was the 16th of August, 1967, 2 days following Marsh's last radio broadcast and disappearance. The hikers handed the map over to park officials with a small message at the bottom that said, "If found, please understand. I wasn't taken. I chose to go. The others are not what we think." The symbols are an invitation, not a warning. But once you cross, there is no coming back the same. It was sent to the University of Missouri for verification and analysis, according to official pronouncements. No other details have been made public, and later Freedom of Information Act requests pertaining to the map have been turned down because they are still being investigated. What may be the only photographic proof of the disappearances was taken in 2022 by a spelunking enthusiast who was investigating the less visited caves close to Alley Spring. She was looking at photos taken deep in a tight side channel when she spotted what looked like new tool marks on a rock wall that looked natural. When she returned with better illumination equipment, she found that a narrow hole, purposefully masked by the rock wall, was hidden. Past this entrance, she discovered a little room with walls covered in symbols that matched those in Kincaid's notebook, but were not evident in the few of his expedition's photos that have survived. After taking a lot of pictures and videos, she wisely left without doing any more research. When she got back to the surface, she discovered that the majority of her digital photos were distorted and only displayed solid black frames, or static. One snapshot was all that was left, and it depicted a wall covered in circular patterns that interlocked and seemed to encircle a stylized human figure with lengthy limbs. The spelunker shared the surviving photo online and informed park officials of her finding. The image was taken down from several platforms within hours due to community standard violations, even though it didn't include anything genuinely offensive. By saying that she no longer wants to talk about the incident and has chosen to pursue other interests, the spelunker herself has declined to be interviewed further. They may be correct in saying that some mysteries remain unsolved, not because they can't be answered, but rather because doing so would force us to face realities we're not ready to face. Shannon County's woodlands have endured for thousands of years. Over geological ages, the hollows have gotten deeper. Whatever moves stone markers, waits in the shadows of some caverns, walks in those isolated areas, and puts food at the edge of researchers' camps, it was there before us, and probably will be for a very long time. Perhaps the tale of the disappearances in 1903 and all those that followed is just one of human encroachment into areas we were never supposed to be in, of boundaries violated that were put in place to protect us rather than to restrict us, and of doors unlocked that were closed for a purpose. Walter Kincaid's last journal entry, written just before he disappeared into the landscape he had been trying to understand, contains the most telling statement. I understand now why some stories shouldn't be told, why some doors shouldn't be opened. It's possible that those who went missing in the Ozarks discovered this fact too late. The same fate awaits those who look for them. Additionally, people who only share their stories have to hope that they won't draw unwelcome attention with just words. Because some secrets are held not by deliberate concealment, but by the repercussions that befall those who find them, as the people of Shannon County appear to realize without needing to be told. Perhaps the most amazing thing about the Shannon County mystery in the century since the first disappearances were reported is how successfully it has eluded contemporary scrutiny. The hollows of the Ozarks continue to hold secrets in a time when digital technology enables us to explore the deepest oceans and most distant mountain summits. When satellite photography may uncover ancient structures concealed behind jungle canopies, and when DNA testing can identify remains decades old, people are still sucked up by the soil without any trace. Despite being partially buried by time, the stones remain in their circles and continue to perform their intended purpose. In locations that are not shown on any official map, the symbols are nonetheless used to identify cave walls, and occasionally, those who search for answers still don't come back. Follow the designated trails if you are passing through Shannon County. Savor the trees, the rivers, and the stunning cliffs. Take pictures of the scenery, but maybe avoid taking pictures of any odd stone formations you come across. Additionally, if you are hiking in the bush and you come across a tiny hole where the birds stop talking, the air suddenly becomes cold despite the summer heat, and sounds appear to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, you should turn around, return the way you came from. Certain doors are designed to stay closed. There are some thresholds that should never be crossed. Furthermore, some stories like this one are best left unfinished, lingering through the voids like whispers, alerting anybody who might listen that some secrets have a cost that is too high for simple curiosity to bear.